Hi everyone, I am the Bensei, and welcome to another Bensei Explains. Today we'll be doing our first ever match breakdown. If you are interested in getting one of your matches broken down by me, get in touch, send us your videos, and we'll try and make that happen. Today's breakdown is of Franc in the black and white Budo rash guard. He normally trains out of Elevate MMA in Melbourne, but has dropped through Elements on a few occasions. So first thing to notice here is that neither athlete is displaying all that much in the way of stance discipline. They're switching their lead leg forward and back, their head is frequently outside their base of support, elbows away from the center line, arms extended. This is going to make it difficult to efficiently set up attacks or defense. That said, this was quite a nice opportunistic snatch single attempt from Franc. Really good head position, very fast level change, good drive. He had an excellent chance to get it to the mat by either running the pipe or switching to an outside double finish. Now with the reset, we're going to see a situation that is very common in most combat sports, and that is a situation where one or both athletes is doing a lot of activity but not actually moving all that much. They're more or less just standing on the spot. Franc's opponent attempts a quick shot in. You can see Franc has got a down block in place, but because of his broken structure, he's still very much out of balance. Now, the down block is ultimately what allowed Franc to survive this takedown attempt, but because he was out of balance, it cost him a lot of energy and offered him no real counter-attacking opportunities. This second reset will also highlight another very common problem in combat sports, which is the tendency to operate more or less purely in straight lines, going forward and back, but not much in the way of side to side. You see it in all kinds, striking and grappling, but the sooner you can train yourself to use circles, the more success you're going to have. Now, we're about to see Franc attempt what I assume is Uchimata, but he neglected to force the head down. This led into a scramble, which ultimately resulted in his opponent getting decent throwing grips, taking Franc to the mat, where Franc was able to recover to a half guard. Franc works to start turning in on his opponent, putting his back first on the mat and then trying to turn onto one hip. Now, it's a little hard to see, but I'm fairly certain that Franc has the right-handed underhook in this scenario. If that is the case, Franc should be using that to turn even further in, bump his opponent up and forward over his head, so that Franc ends up being in a position where he can either come up onto his knees and take the back, or start attacking for sweeps. However, at this point, his opponent attempts to drive straight to mount, with no real upper body control. This allows Franc to turn in, start building a base, and begin working for a takedown. It was very risky though. Here, he could have had his back taken, and here, he could have been guillotined. However, it worked out, and once again we can see excellent head placement on behalf of Franc, switching from the single to the double for the finish, and then more or less straight into the guard pass. It's important to note that while Franc has passed the guard, he hasn't really established a proper side control yet. His opponent's doing a pretty good job at keeping him framed out and down over the hip line. This would be more worrying if he was making more effort to move the hips or bridge free, but as it is, it's almost like he's just trying to push Franc off. So Franc's doing the right thing, he's just staying tight, being persistent, and working slowly but surely into the armpit, trying to get either an underhook or head control. Here he establishes both, but he hasn't realigned his body in order to maximize the control and pressure that's available to him here. And as a result, his opponent is fairly easily able to re-guard. You can also see that despite having his hands linked and his arms more or less in the correct spot, there's practically zero cross-face pressure being applied by Franc. You can see his opponent can move his head around more or less at will. You can look into Franc instead of being forced to look away from Franc. And this is making it much more difficult for Franc to flatten his opponent out and pass in a controlling manner. Despite this, Franc is able to step out of his opponent's half guard, but because he hasn't got good control of either his opponent's hips or his opponent's shoulders, his opponent is able to quickly re-establish the half guard again. I'm just going to speed up the footage a little bit at this point, as the remainder of the match is more or less just the last sequence playing out a couple more times. If I were to boil down my advice to Franc to 3 key points. The first would be to develop a consistent structure for his stand-up game. That change alone will dramatically increase his takedown effectiveness. The second would be to work on half guard bottom and top. At white belt, and indeed in most of blue belt, the outcome of matches is determined by the athlete who knows half guard best. And finally, I would advise Franc to become a lot more vicious with his crossface. At the very least, your opponent must not be able to turn towards you. To finish up, I would like to say a big thank you to Franc for sending in this video and allowing me to tear his match to shreds. If you think I missed something, please post it in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode of Bensei Explains, please like, share and subscribe.